Welcome everybody to this webinar, Liberating Wings, Saving Yourself, Birds, and the World. I'm the Reverend Dr. LoraKim Joyner, and I'm so glad you've joined with us today. Let us begin with these opening words from Mary Oliver. Chunky and noisy, but with stars in their black feathers, they spring from the telephone wire. They are acrobats in the freezing wind. Ah, world, what lessons you prepare for us. I am learning now of grief and of getting past it. I feel my boots trying to leave the ground. I feel my heart pumping hard. I want to think again of dangerous and noble things. I want to be light and frolicsome. I want to be improbably beautiful and afraid of nothing, as though I had wings. And so we come to this place where birds can help us feel light and frolicsome, to dare to take on, to think about dangerous as well as noble things. So this is our time to check in. If you're by yourself, just pause for a moment and try to think of what birds mean to you, or journal. And where have they helped you get past grief or feel lighter, as if you had wings? And if you're with someone else, ask them these questions. And once again, we return to the Starlings, set to music. We only have time to play a short part of it. This video is on YouTube. It's a way to be with the Starlings and their flocks, which are called murmurations. And oh, how they move, and oh, how they swirl. I can share with what birds mean for me. Everything. When I was a child, 4 years of age, I remember dreaming of birds. They were my metaphor, in both hard dreams and in good dreams. And as I grew older, I wanted to dedicate my life to them. And they do help me get past grief. I only have to look outside the window and there's a lightness, a connection, a sense of the beauty within and without. But I have to be honest, as a wildlife veterinarian working in parrot conservation in the Americas, they also bring grief too, as all life does. So what this webinar is about today is how birds can help us with transformation and liberation. And one thought about liberation is that we can become transformed when we know ourselves and our world. And we can never truly know all of ourselves, but it's a goal, it's a way of going forward. And this transformation of ourselves liberates us from the constrictions placed onto us from a society based on domination and oppression. So to really know ourselves, we're liberated from what the world has tried to carve us to be, to feed those who are powerful and wish to dominate us. And those who do, that our society in some way blesses, causes the harm and oppression of ourselves and of birds and our biotic community and our earth. And so as we become free in knowing ourselves and all others, we have the chance to free others. So going out and looking at birds is a way to free ourselves and free all the birds, such as in this story from a Zen master. The disciple was always complaining to his master, "You are hiding the final secret of Zen from me." And he would not accept the master's denials. One day they were walking the hills when they heard a bird sing. "Did you hear that bird sing?" said the master. "Yes," said the disciple. "Well, now you know that I've hidden nothing from you." "Yes," said the disciple. So birds can teach us everything. So an example of how birds can teach us everything, I want to lift up the Zen tradition, in particular an author by the name of James Austin. He is a neuroanatomist, a doctor. He's also a Zen practitioner, and he likes to watch birds. And so in these two books that I'm picturing here, he tells the story of how birds and birdsong is interwoven into the Zen tradition, where just like what you saw here, people will be out and suddenly look up and see a bird or hear a bird song, and then they were enlightened. And so there's something about looking at birds and looking up, especially, that allows us to integrate into a wholeness and into a clarity of the way we were thinking. So we were out, he was telling me his theory one day, and we were out looking at birds, and I told him about a story that happened to me. And he said, oh yes, that's it exactly. This is a very old tradition. This is what happens when people look at birds. So let me tell you the story that I told him. I was out walking, this is in the 1990s in Guatemala, a Central American country, and we had been out walking since the dark, surveying our parrot's nest, and we came up to one of the last remaining forest edges. And the sun was coming up, and as it was coming up, it was clearing the trees, and steam, because it was in the tropics and humid, was starting to leave from the top of the tree canopy. And just as I looked over at this, a flock of parrots burst from the jungle, loud and noisy. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground, on my knees, sobbing. I don't know what happened. To this day, I can't really explain it. But something happened, and I fell to the ground. And for months afterwards, I had a sure clarity that life was love. And that was the most noblest cause in the world. I was euphoric for months, and it began to wear off. But it was such a clarity at that moment. And when I told that story to Jim Austin, he said, what direction were you looking up? And I said, well, I was kind of looking to the right. He says, that's what happens mostly. And then he was able to explain it to me based on the way the brain works. So sudden indications of clarity and understanding of the world, knowing ourselves and knowing the world and our relationships, can happen with watching birds. And so I asked you, when has a nature or bird experience ever left you speechless or not? It doesn't have to be a big event like that. It can be just looking out and watching, well, maybe a flock of birds go by. One time I was in New Mexico, and I was leading a youth group around looking at Apache, a Bosque Park, where there were flocks and flocks of geese overwintering, such as these snow geese here. And the children were having some trouble, and especially one young man, Mikey, a little boy actually. Parents had been drug addicts, had substance abuse issues, and so he was having a hard time concentrating. And I said, what's he getting out of this? And we came up to this flock of snow geese, and all of a sudden, for some reason, the snow geese, with a clap like thunder, took off into the sky. And this young Mikey took off running, and so did the other children, jumping and dancing, and they went into the arms of their parents and just looked up with their mouths open. And so Mikey's grandparents held him, and they were in awe together. Something without words. They just knew. I wasn't there to explain it to them. I was off in a corner somewhere talking to somebody, and the children knew. And awe is good for us. Awe promotes healing and health and connection. So go out and be awed by birds whenever you can. And so I've told you my story, and you can pause now and reflect on it, journal on it, or share with other people who might be watching this video with you. Now, when you go outside, just like little Mikey, he didn't really want to be there. But you know what they've found out? When you go for a walk, the same benefits are possible to you whether you wanted to go for the walk or not. If it's cold, if you got a big to-do list going on, you don't have time, doesn't matter. It works for you. And I want to say that if you aren't able to walk for all kinds of various reasons, looking outside the window has similar impacts. looking even at a picture of nature helps, as does a painting. So I want to emphasize that it's open for you. But all the various things that going for a walk while you're looking for birds improves our cognition, our attention, our health, our mood, contributes to happiness, reduces stress, reduces crime rates. The more trees you have per city block, the graph will just show a falling crime rate, and it promotes healings. Now, something else that you can do is to look up. And again, if you can't be outside, just look out the window and look up, be it trees, and I'll tell you, birds, especially those little warblers top in the trees, they do cause you to look up. They have done studies where they had one group, a control group, not look up, and they had another group look up at some trees. And they tested people's empathy and compassion and measured their kindness, their ability to help another person. It was greater after those people were looking up at the trees. So this is how going out looking for birds can help us and help our world. And just reminding us with that past slide is that the health is for us as well as for our communities. Having more trees, more birds helps our biodiversity as well as our mental health. Now we can call this subconscious impact on our health, we could call it ecological empathy, which is gaining a sense of belonging through experiencing connection and beauty in the biotic community. It's a subconscious thing. I mean, maybe you're thinking that as you go, going, well, then there are birds and there's predators and trees and there's water and it's all connected. And that can help you feel like you belong and you're part of the cycle of life. And it's also subconscious because you may not know it, but other beings are relating to you. We may not be able to read their expressions. They may not look like they're looking at us, but the world is full of relationships. That's ecology. And so you are seen and you are heard and you matter. And again, even if cognitively we may not be knowing that, subconsciously our body knows that we belong. So as we get out and you're going to go looking for birds, go ahead and hug a tree. Have you ever done that? Have you ever felt that when you embrace a tree that you're being hugged back, it has to do with our proprioceptors, and there's a true reason why that feels like that. And also just walking and being out and being with birds, we embrace all that they are, we take them in, and it feels that we have a sense of belonging and a sense of connection. And ecological empathy is a part of ecological intelligence. And here's a long definition about that, but it's the ability to be able to recognize the hidden web of connections between human activity and nature systems and the complexities of those intersections. And so when we understand that, we have choice on minimizing harm and maximizing flourishing for all. And so ecological intelligence is we're beginning to move into the cognitive, into the awareness. Our bodies know that we belong and have relationships, but we can also learn all that we can about how these relationships work and do our work to accept the inherent harm, tragedy, benefit, and beauty in life systems. It's all in there. As I often say, there is no beauty without tragedy. Those sun parakeets behind me are only here from a long line of devastation and tragedy and what else evolution brings to life on this planet. And if we can accept this reality, we increase our choice in how to react to this reality, either as far as resilience for ourselves or paradoxically to do everything we can to change this reality. So let's pause and take a moment and ask ourselves, what is hard for us to embrace? This is a picture, it was an archaeology discovery of some people who had been buried together, embraced. So what is hard for you to embrace? Death, loss, suffering, harming to survive? What else? Pause the video and reflect or journal or share this with other people at this time. So here's the vision of how birds can help us with acceptance. If we can accept everything that is a bird's life, we can help accept everything that is life. And it gives us this chance of knowing and living in the truth of what life is. This is a picture of a village in Honduras where I work in La Mosquitia. It's fairly remote. And the village took upon themselves to rescue the very endangered scarlet macaw. So back in the early days, before they could build a cage or get any help, they just would rescue the macaws from poachers and then feed them off of their porches. And so here we can see the young children feeding these birds and a very malnourished dog in front of us. So I have worked with this village, and I have worked in conservation for over 33 years. And it's hard to accept the loss of our parrots, our domestic animals that aren't treated well, and the loss of children's and the flourishing of human life. Oof. That's the work. That is my work. And birds help me along in accepting that. Here's how. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Thin Red Line. This is a quote out of it. There's a soldier, and it's World War II on some Pacific island, and he's musing about his discovery of how there's beauty everywhere, even though he's in the middle of this war, and even how the enemy is beautiful. And so he's walking along a ridge, and they're bombing in the background. And a bomb hits a tree where there's a nest of parrots, and a baby parrot falls out of the tree, and he's looking at this dying bird, this dying parrot. And he says, one man looks at a dying bird and thinks there's nothing but unanswered pain, that death's got the final word. It's laughing at him. Another person sees that same bird and feels the glory, feels something smiling through it. Hard to do. None of us like to see baby birds dying. I know I don't. But how can we look at all that a bird's life is, the predator-prey relationship, the human impact, and how can we always know there's a smile and always know that there's death following the story of birds? But let's start, maybe not real easy, but let's not look at a dying baby bird. Let's look at all that a bird is, such as their poop. Now, a lot of people don't consider bird droppings, bird feces, they're called, as very beautiful. You're going to go, really? Again? Especially if there's a lot of it. So one time, I was leading a spiritual walk in Nashville, Tennessee, a very urban area, and we came across a sidewalk that was overhung where a lot of pigeons like to perch. There was just a pile of pigeon poop there. So when we got there, because I am a veterinarian, you know, so I started to explain what are the components of bird feces. Urine and urates is feces, and they don't have much urine because they don't have bladders. And why don't they have bladders? Well, because they have to fly. They also have hollow bones and air sacs so that they can fly. And so I was explaining this, and one of the women in the group looked up at me and said, I don't know how anyone can look at bird poop and not know that there is a God. I thought she was kidding, but she wasn't. She was so moved by the beauty of bird droppings that it helped connect her to her faith and to awe and wonder and possibility. So go out and look at bird poop. You never know what you're going to find. Here's just one picture. It looks a little bit like bird poop, right? Well, it's actually a moth. And if you go out and Google this, go out and do a search and do bird poop, animals that look like bird poop. There's a whole host of them that try to mimic bird poop as a form of camouflage. Bird droppings are beautiful. So accepting all that a bird is, like even understanding the science of bird droppings, is a form of multispecies intelligence. Now, again, I told you we're moving into the cognitive arc here. Multispecies intelligence is the ability to understand species' needs, behaviors, motivations, and their interconnecting relationships with others and their habitat so as to benefit them. So it's just saying, you know, what is another species, and trying to be as objective as we can about our understanding of that. Boil it down really easy. Multispecies intelligence is asking, what are others feeling and needing? What are others feeling and needing? So shall we practice a little bit with this? So what is this bird feeling? Now this is clearly a human projection, the angry birds, right? This is an angry bird, right? It's feeling mad. Purely human projection. But what we want to do is put ourselves in the place of birds and then go do some research, go find out about birds to really know what they're feeling. So here's another example. What are these birds feeling? Going back to some starlings here, they're taking a bath. What are they feeling? Well, if you imagine it's your own body and you're in the ocean or you're swimming or it looks like you're playing, you might say you feel happiness, that you're glad, relief, cool body temperature. Right. But let's also consider some other things that maybe are going on. Maybe they're taking a bath because they have external mites or parasites. And they're actually feeling kind of irritated. Ugh, and they want something, they want to get rid of that pain or that itchiness. Maybe they're afraid. Their feathers are wetter. It's a little bit harder to fly away. Maybe they're angry with each other because they're in close proximity and they want their own turf. Maybe they're feeling connection, feeling ease and happiness because they're with their buddies and having a good time. So we really need to look and really study and question all the various things that could be going on in a bird. So that's what they feel. Now, what do they need? Every living being has a need. And at least for many kinds of life, we can use this 5 domains of well-being to figure out what they need. And they put this into 5 categories. They're trying to be as scientific as possible. What nutrition needs do they have? What environmental needs do they have? What health needs? What behavior and what mental states? You can go and look at a bird and go, well, how's your nutrition doing? You got a lot of food, your feathers look good, you look like you're in good weight. Your environment, can you nest? Is there pollution? Are there cars? Health, do you have any diseases? Behavior, are you able to do all the behaviors? Are you able to breed? Are you able to raise young? Are you able to mate? Are you able to fly? Are you able to play? Mental state then is what are they feeling? Anxiety, stress, happiness, gladness. And so we answer all those questions about what a bird might need. We make this a little bit easier when we are working with children or having an exhibition booth somewhere. We call it, what does the parrot say? And so we have all these various pictures that show parrots in various states. And we just ask them, what are you feeling? If you were this parrot, what are you feeling? And it's amazing how people get this, how they can really do this and see that parrots are like us. And they're able to say, well, they feel great flying, or they feel hungry, or they feel lonely because their parents aren't there, or they feel happy because they're playing, they're angry because they're fighting, or they're sad and bored because they're in a cage. And so these are the ways we want to think, and just think really simple: mad, glad, sad, and afraid. What are the animals feeling and needing? Now, just a couple cautions about undertaking growing your multi-species intelligence through birds. We have a bias of the past, all of us do, in the way we were raised in our cultures to not really see what other animals are feeling and needing. Here's an example. Have you ever heard the term reptile brain? So what we have here is we have, reptile here in our basal part, our cerebellum, that just helps us move. It's just really basic part of the brain. And then as we come up into our limbic system, we're a mammal, we're able to have emotions. And then we come up here into our cortex, where we're thinking and we're smarter, so we've got a lot more cortex. And these are our hypersocial animals, the complexity of getting along, where we have a much bigger frontal cortex. So they'll say, oh, it's our reptile brain, it's our prehistoric part. But that's actually a species comment. I once emailed one of the leading vertebrate comparative anatomists in the world, had written a book, and I said, tell me about the reptile brain. And he said, oh, we have got that all wrong. Every kind of vertebrate that we have ever found has all kinds of the brain. Maybe not very much frontal cortex, or not much cortex, but they've all got the basic tissue. Even the reptiles had all the components of the tissue. For instance, dinosaurs, they've been able to do endocasts of dinosaurs' brains and found out that they had the brain tissue that we did. And as we've learned, dinosaurs cared for their young, made decisions, had emotions to help move them towards satisfaction and away from harm. So we really can't use the word reptile brain because all species have all these various abilities. And then also, here's another example of bias from the past is with birds. You ever heard the term bird brain to say they're kind of stupid? Well, part of that is because they're so small and their brains are so small. So we had that bias. We also had the bias because avian brains don't have the tissue that makes up our cortex. They have a different kind of cell, and it's called the pallium here. So you see this right here? And it's really big, especially in our crows and our jays and our parrots. A paper came out in 2005 where it said, wait a minute, it's convergent evolution. They may not have much cortex, but they hijacked another kind of neural tissue to do their thinking part. And so as it turns out, and it's very heavily innervated, it's got a lot of, it's able to make a lot of connections, that many of the species of birds, for the amount of cognitive tissue they have, neural tissue for thinking, complex thoughts, for their body weight is more than us, more than the great apes. And so once that paper came out, it lifted up kinds of ways of now interpreting differently birds' behavior. So be careful of our bias from the past. Because what we're finding out as we study, especially the parrots, that they have proteins in their neural tissue, in their brain tissue, that helps young parrots develop quickly and very amazingly amounts of neural tissue in their brain. It's a very similar protein that people have to have us grow brains really huge in our young children. And they have a very similar protein. So here's the summary of our bias from the past as we grow our multi-species intelligence. We want to watch out for anthropomorphism, which is a way of saying they're exactly like us. They think and feel like humans do. Now, anthropomorphism is good because they do think and feel like us, but not exactly like us. So this is the extreme. Is we want to watch out for the extremes. So can you think of where in your life you are biased in this way, where you think they're exactly like us? And we're playing around with dogs here. One example that people in our workshops often bring up is this idea of dogs showing unconditional love. They are way cool and really are doing something. I mean, we co-evolved basically with dogs, and they can read facial expressions, they have facial expressions, they are an awful lot like us. But do we know that what they're expressing is unconditional love? It seems like a human projection onto them. So we want to be careful about assuming that they're just like us and, oh, they can be cooped up in the house all day. They'll be fine. You know, humans are fine. They'll be fine. We don't know. Then there is the idea of anthropocentrism, which centers humans in perception and understanding. That says that we're the only ones that are like us. They're nothing like us. So this is a picture of some dogs and some animals saying, don't worry with human subjects. They don't feel pain the way we do. When I was in veterinary school in the mid-1980s, I had gone through a rotation of orthopedic medicine, which means we're working at bone surgery. And I was in ICU where the dogs were coming out of anesthesia from a bone surgery, and they were crying and screaming, basically. And I asked the resident, I said, well, are they in pain? Can we give them something? And the resident said, no, that's just the interaction. It's just a reaction of the anesthesia. They're just coming out of anesthesia. Well, in the 1980s, there were 3 papers on pain management for animals post-surgery. Now there's hundreds and thousands of articles on how to deal with pain in animals. But when I went through veterinary school, I was told, don't worry, they don't feel pain the way we do. How wrong were we? Now, pain medication is offered all the time with animals because they are like us. So let's practice multi-species intelligence. And just like with ecological intelligence, empathy mixes with the intelligence, is to put ourselves in the place of the other species and actually to move our bodies like the other species. And if we do this, our bodies will know what they're feeling and needing because our bodies are reacting very similar. And then we can go do our work and find out, well, what do they really feel and need? So this kind of empathy is the ability to put yourself in the place of conspecifics that are your species or heterospecifics that are different from you. And it can elicit emotions and empathy that corresponds to greater willingness to help nature. They've done studies where they say, you go think like a bird and you don't for 15 minutes. And then they could test you and say, oh, the group that put themselves in the place of like a bird that had been in an oil spill were more likely to want to donate to conservation causes. So when you're out looking at birds, go ahead and try to name them, take pictures, do all that wonderful stuff that's fun with birds. But maybe also just be still and be the bird. Just be the bird. Take 15 minutes and just try to get beyond words and thoughts and just go be the bird. And you want to move like the bird. And here is a YouTube video of, this is a captive heron. And it just kind of, with a lot of mirth, shows how we can act and move like another animal. So go out and try that when you're out watching birds. So as we begin to sum up, why would we watch birds? It's because we can be fed through a transformation of knowing ourselves and the world, multi-species intelligence. We can be fed through physical and mental health. Walks are good for us, our beauty, ecological empathy, all of this is great stuff. And it can help us make a more just, biotic community because we know them. We know what they feel and need. We are connected to them. We are the birds. And so we want to live well so that they can live well. This is Kiter Falls in Guyana. It's the greatest drop of waterfalls in the world. It's in, as I said, it was in Guyana. It's beautiful. We want to preserve the forests of Guyana. They do too for ecotourism because people come to see this. And we want to see it because it's good for our soul and our spirit to have this. But as we try to feed our spirit, it has an impact on the animal life around us. Because on the side of this waterfalls, when I was there a couple years ago, a pair of red and green macaws were nesting. And they flew back and forth in front of the falls. And so what is good for us, as we know ourselves and others, knowing what we're feeling and needing, it's good for all of life. So being in healthy relationship with ourselves and other humans and with life on this planet comes from knowing ourselves and our world. So birding, which means going out and looking for birds, supports an interpersonal and interpersonal vision of planetary health. It means the more we know ourselves and get along with ourselves, and the more we know others and get along with others and know that there's all of this interconnection, it's how we're going to get to planetary health. And so as a final story about how birds can help lead us for health and in turn we can be good for them. This is a village, a mosquito village in Mabita, which is in Honduras on the Mosquito Coast. And we have a parrot project there. And so it was the beginning of the parrot season one year, and people were going around and making comments and saying prayers. And when it came my turn, I did a poem from Mary Oliver called Wild Geese, except they don't have geese there. So I substituted a couple things and put in scarlet macaws instead of wild geese. So please excuse me, Mary Oliver. And the poem went like this. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the jungles repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world moves on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes. Meanwhile, the macaws, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. And you know, right when I got to that part of the poem, we could all hear a group of 5 scarlet macaws calling off in the distance, coming towards us. We were pretty surprised because these birds have been so decimated by the illegal pet trade that there aren't many scarlet macaws left in Honduras, and they don't fly over the village, and certainly not in family groups of 5. So it was really wonderful to hear them come so close to us. And so I continued the poem. No matter who you are, no matter how lonely you are, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild macaws, harsh and exciting, announcing over and over again your place in the family of things. And just when I finished the poem, that group of 5 macaws was directly overhead. People cried. People of so many different ethnicities and languages, because the birds were telling them that we all belonged. And in that great sense of belonging, we could welcome them to this planet Earth. And it gave us the resilience and the courage, we, ordinary people, in extraordinary times, to produce extraordinary results. And so this village and the surrounding 10 villages with them are now part of the largest community protected conservation project for parrots in the world. And it's because of the awe of the parrots and how they want them always in their lives. And so the conservation work that we do, and my sense of looking at birds, is that it's a practice of liberation, because it tells us that none are free until all are free. And by that, we very much mean the people and us that live with the birds, because if we are not liberated, if we are not well, we cannot take care of our planet. This is a picture of a yellow-naped Amazon, a young bird that was rescued and was successfully released in Nicaragua a couple of years ago. And as I record this, we are in the time of sheltering in place, of being homed, much like parrots are because of the pandemic, the coronavirus. And this is a cartoon that was put out by a bunch of our organizations. And the parrot is saying, oh, they gave me 30 years. How many did they give you? And the human's saying months. So in this time, when there's a new transformation happening in our world, it's impacting everybody, some much worse than others. And we're all having our lifestyles restricted in some ways more than others, and some people are really suffering. And so we may feel trapped, we may not allowed to go outside or move or work. And so maybe we have a little sense of how birds feel that aren't just given 30 years, but they're given their whole life in cages. But the point of this is not to produce shame for us humans that have brought parrots to where they are. It is to know this is a time, it can be, of slowing down for many, many people. This is a time to go out and look at birds and intentionally say, how can I liberate myself as I liberate the world? How can we build this into a better world for all? So how can you? Well, I wanted to say that there's a lot of resources out there, even if you can't get out. And I know for a lot of these resources, you need the internet. And so one of this is the Cornell live cams, and I'm going to go ahead and click on them so you can see what I'm talking about. This is one way to just be with birds, even if you can't see them yourself. So here I am on a website, and you get to pick all kinds of animals. So earlier, the Kestrel was pretty popular, but let's try the red-tailed hawk. Let's see if she's on her nest right now. Well, she's facing away from us, but can you see her there? Right here? There we go. There we go. And I'm live on the internet right now. So let's try the ospreys now. And you can just kind of go around and see which ones you want to see. So there's the osprey. And that bird sound you hear is actually what she's hearing as she sits on her eggs. So don't forget this resource. There's lots of websites and information, but these live cams are some of the more spectacular ones. Other resources are apps you can get on your phone. It's the Merlin app that helps you identify birds. eBird is where you can go and find out what birds are happening in your area, and you can enter data to be a citizen scientist. And then Audubon is a great site for finding out what advocacy you can do, especially if you're at home and aren't able to get out. What can I do now? How can I be a birder for all of life? Our group, One Earth Conservation, also has a lot of resources. Most of it is free. So just go to our website and check out all these various places. We also have a book called Nurturing Discussions and Practices, Nurturing Yourself, Nature, and Your Relationships. It's 8 individual guides that you can do individually. Mostly it's meant for a group. Gives you practices in reading and discussion questions. There's like, for instance, there's a whole chapter in there on birding as a spiritual practice. So you can go to Amazon and get this book if you'd like. We also have a program called Parrot Conservation Course. It's just now opening up. We're taking applications. It's an online ability starting in July of 2020, where you can learn everything you ever wanted to know about parrots and how to do parrot conservation and how you can do it from your own home. And so we think this might be good timing in this time of the pandemic where so many people are restricted. They're under quarantine. They cannot move. We can possibly do this and learn everything we can and then do everything we can for the wonderful bird life around us. So please go to our site and see if that appeals to you and sign up for that. And so I want to thank you for being a part of this. If you've enjoyed this, we would enjoy your feedback. We'd like you to be part of one of our teams, volunteer teams, part of the Parrot Conservation Course, and donations certainly, because we are a nonprofit and that is how we operate. And so before we go, in closing, be the beauty that you are. A poem from Rumi says, let the beauty you are be what you do. Birds tell us that we are beautiful and are connected to the beauty. So let their beauty, let your beauty compel you to be what you do in the world.